Welcome to the School Leaders Project. As we bid farewell to this year, we wanted to take a moment to recap some of the amazing insights that came out of the show in 2023.
If we want agency for our students, where are we providing agency for our teachers? Again, the misalignment in asking teachers to do something that we in fact are not providing experiences that are similar or aligned. Teachers will revert back to what leadership is doing rather than what leadership is saying.
I believe that asking great questions is at the heart of solving our world's most pressing problems. I believe that teachers are uniquely positioned to promote freedom and a more just society. And I believe that teaching is a team sport and that we need each other. But when the going gets tough, the tough get curious. And it will get tough. There's always going to be something happening, whether it's a pandemic or AI or an angry parent. And so when we have that touchstone of our beliefs and values, it makes it easier to make decisions. Will we make perfect to sort, grounding ourselves in why we're doing what we're doing? And that means getting clear on our core beliefs and values and talking about that over and over again all the time and what it looks like and giving examples.
I think people need to be believed in. And when you see somebody doing something, acknowledge them in a way that doesn't just speak to their quality of doing something, but to the quality of who they are. And so one thing I really believe strongly about with teaching is I don't want students to be so focused on getting things done, but I want them to understand is who they are matters more than what they do. And so that element of being instead of doing, you are not a human doing, you are a human being. I try to say, speak to the kids of who they are, not to just how well they perform. I fear for some of our students who are so focused on performing things that their whole identity is tied up in how well they do on this, that, or the other thing, as opposed to you matter because you're a human. So how can you do that with your staff is, speak to their identity. And, why do people misbehave? I would argue they misbehave because they don't know who they are. If they have a sense of identity of who they are, then they will behave well.
Do I want to be right or effective? There's a lot of self-protection. There's a lot of blame. There's a lot of stuff. In order to be effective, which is really what I think we want to do, we might need to change up some stuff and get over ourselves. So that's a question I ask myself when I'm in a mood. Do you want to be right or effective? You are right. You're right. This is no fun. Now let's be effective. And move on. That's one thing. The other thing is to just tell people what a person told me at one point. I was just so overwhelmed in a particular situation when I did this thing. And she looked at me and she said, "You haven't even used up 9/10 of what you're capable of. You have what it takes. Now go get them." And I was like, oh, thanks. I feel much more empowered. So I guess the piece of advice I would offer there is just keep telling yourself you haven't even used up 9/10 of yourself yet. You've got it. You can do it. And then just go on with it. Peter Block will say in a book that he wrote, the answer to how is yes. The answer to how is yes. You have to actually just trust the yes, trust yourself, realize that you need to be effective, and then just go for it.
We can't measure teacher effectiveness by students' test scores on narrow tests. And if we keep looking at that as a measure, people are going to stay really locked up And we need to unlock people so that they can innovate and, really be real people. I've just been doing some work with elementary teachers and I was reading their reflections in the last few days, and they're talking about this. I was so locked up before. I was locked up. I was just doing this. And now I feel free. Like I can choose tasks and I can play with the content. And it's a freedom. It's a form of freedom. So we need that for teachers, and we won't get it while we're measuring ourselves by kids' achievement on standardized tests. And metrics, okay, we can have metrics, but they need to be better ones.
Sometimes leaders can inadvertently do is use the curriculum almost as a bit of a weapon of control. Well, you can't do that because of the curriculum. Instead of saying, well, I wonder how we could do that and attend to the curriculum.
Yes.
And they're two very different questions. So a lot of that, teachers are looking to leaders for that kind of permission, I think. Permission to play, permission to be responsive, spontaneous and flexible. And I think we give teachers that sense of permission when we invite them to see the curriculum in the broader way.
Every individual student needs to develop a jagged profile of abilities, passions, and knowledge. So everybody is different. Cindy, you are different because you have a unique combination of abilities, personalities, and skills. So that makes you a unique person. Every human being needs to be more unique. So instead of the same, if you are the same, machines can do that. So we need human beings to be unique and jagged profile of capabilities.
Ask and listen to learners. What are the experiences of the learners who are in the system? What are their goals? What are their aspirations? Listen to them. They often have the most amazing ideas, and we too often underestimate the young people in our systems.
Ask the question about who cares, and you're going to widen the circle of involvement and inclusion. And when you bring people together who care about something, and then you ask the question, what's possible? Anything can be done. And so the leader's role is to continually ask those two questions. Who cares? What's possible?
Promote the importance of student voice. And quite frankly, the voice of everyone that participates in school, to make sure that voices are listened to, learned from, and then ultimately acted upon. Voice is the feature. It's not like an add-on. It's a critical component for all of us to be able to share our voice, to be listened to be learned from, and to be acted with. We need to start reflecting, not finding it, because I don't think we've ever lost it, but sometimes it's out there. So let's reflect on that purpose to renew your passion.
Leadership is about action, not position, title, or power. So when we look at the fundamental elements of, nobody likes to be told what to do. They want to know, hey, how do we do it? What tells us if we're successful? Where's the inherent value? How will I see that this is going to actually help me do what I already do better? The digital aspect is how technology just seamlessly supports all the different things that embody effective leadership. Modeling, building capacity, transparency, storytelling, looking at how we then can get information out in real, anytime, anywhere with anyone we want. How we can use technology. I think the biggest thing when we think about the world is a much smaller place.
Start with the end in mind, be clear about the most important goals you're after, and then plan everything backward, including school structures like schedule, use of time, PD, focus, etc. If we want to include more authentic performance-based assessments in the mix, and we're working with secondary teachers who might have 7 class periods and a teaching load of 100 to 150 kids a day, we got to bite the bullet on the systemic factor of when will teachers have time to look at all that work that students produce on performance tasks and projects.
Nothing is as important as returning to first principles often and asking yourself, why do I do this? What do I really believe about people? What do I really believe about curriculum? And not accepting the simple inherited wisdom. Because I just think this is not to devalue the inherited wisdom. The inherited wisdom was exactly the right solution by a truth seeker in a different environment at a different time. It just doesn't apply exactly to your environment and your time when you're leading, and mine as well, to be personal about it. So I think that's my biggest advice, is just to dig in on things that you just that we take for granted that have been handed to us as the right way to do things.
We need to reprioritize from the transmission of knowledge and the passing of written, memory-based exams, which invite that kind of how do I game the system? And it invites it of school leaders too. It becomes a system that we try to game when it's set up that way. But if we inspire people with intrinsic motivation, if we can persuade millions of young people that they go to schools like going to the gym, you get fitter and stronger and more attractive by going to the gym if you put in the hard work. If you go there to cheat, you don't put in the hard work and you don't get fitter and stronger and more handsome and more beautiful and develop the six-pack that you think is going to attract the most beautiful partner or whatever you like. So school leaders really need to be on it as far as this prioritization is concerned. And I think we have a real need for school leaders. We as school leaders need to be really clear about our own value base. What kinds of people are we trying to produce? With what knowledge, with what forms of expertise, and with what aspects of learnable character? And we need to be really clear about that. Then we can say to ourselves, there are external pressures on us. There is university entrance. There are other kinds of things. How do we weave those things in? But we need to be really solid in everything that we do as leaders, as we engage with staff, as we create policy, as we create the website for the school, as we talk to prospective parents or customers if it's an independent fee-paying school. We need to live and breathe what is our offer, what is our pledge to parents and students about what they're going to leave, what assets they're going to leave with.
I think what it is really being in the situation you're in and knowing yourself as a person and being transparent, really paying attention to the fact they're whole people who, we talk about whole child, there's whole adult people in a setting. They bring their aspirations and disappointments. They bring their family situations, whether wonderful and joyous or difficult. They bring their own health issues to the table. And I think coming to the table as a group of human beings trying to make things work is really important, and to listen, but also be willing to take a stand for kids, and that we're ultimately working for the students. So know the kids, know their needs, and I think deal with people as human beings and giving guidance works much better than here's a list of 10 steps, we go through it, we'll have it. And so I think those relationships work best that are informed, and bottom line is it's always what will help kids for the future.
I just love that. I think it's a thread throughout this is just the humanity of school, and our job as leaders to keep humanity of our teachers and of ourselves and of our students at the center of all that we're doing. And if we do that, we can make missteps along the way, but it's a good compass.
In medicine, they say when you take the oath, it's always in the patient's best interest and do no harm. I think for us, it's like that, and to keep learning. So I suppose that would be the number one thing. Okay, I do have one line. I'm going to cap it off. Buber said that, I believe. He said, if you're going to be a lifelong educator, be a public learner.
And what's harder for adults than learning is unlearning, right? So, and Mike and I are challenged in this way every day. People are like, well, you're subject matter experts, and we're like, right, but we're not effective unless we're stopping to say like, oh, I can't do that anymore. That's not effective. I'm unintentionally standing in my own way or of the people around me. And so how do we unlearn the habits and things that aren't working and replace those with new habits that help us in that space of change and transformation?
From a change management perspective, especially in schools, I think there's a lot of translatable frameworks and behaviors that organizations or schools can do to help leaders navigate these difficult times. And change management is not easy. So I think a lot of for what we do is we talk about the culture and helping think about how do we change the culture? How do we transform the culture to make people, more receptive to change and building a trusting environment?
Our responsibility as leaders is to create a fearless environment, hence the fearless schools. To create an environment in which it is safe to make a mistake, in which mistakes are never the source of humiliation and shame, whether those mistakes are by a struggling reader in first grade, or whether it's by an assistant superintendent who's 55 years old and just made a blooper of a mistake in front of a board. A fearless environment means we learn from mistakes, whether it's the superintendent in the boardroom, the child in a classroom, or for that matter, the captain of an airliner, you've got to have an environment where it's safe for people to push back, safe to make a mistake, safe to say, hey, captain, you're making a mistake. That's what I aspire to be as a leader. I think it would be better in your hypothetical that I were addressing leaders. I would want them to leave with that notion. I got to create a fearless environment in which it's safe and appropriate to make mistakes and to learn from them.
I've come to really believe that intentionality is really important. So to be in a school which is actually asking those kinds of questions, how do we get this balance right? I think once we start being intentional and systemic and asking those questions, that's a big step in the right direction. We are programmed to enjoy learning. We get a dopamine rush when we get something right. You could therefore argue that if kids aren't enjoying school, they're not learning. So I would say if you get the pitch of the learning and the challenge right, you'll make enormous progress and it will feel more joyous. I think we create joy in schools by agreeing on our directions, keeping it simple and getting good at it together. That's when I see teachers happy and kids happy, honestly. So it's not, well, happiness is here and the nitty-gritty is over here. I think they're tightly connected. I think happiness comes from, what are we trying to do? Wouldn't that be great for kids? Let's get good at that. That's to me where the fun of schools is.
No teacher ever stayed at a school because they got a candy bar in their box on payday. You stick a $100,000 bar in front of me, I'm going to snag it and I'm going to be happy for about 3 minutes when I'm shoving that in my face. But what I really want are the more, like you said, the intrinsic things. It's like, do I have a sense of community when I come here? Do I have like-minded people that I'm working with? Do I feel a purpose? Am I making an impact, or am I just coming into work every day and then leaving at 3:30 and like pushing all this aside and not really thinking about it at all in a positive or a negative way?
We need to expose kids when they're young to all kinds of different things that can turn into careers. And the first step is realizing different thinkers exist and they can work together in a complementary manner, because we need all the different kinds of minds. Advanced math, musical instruments, theater, art, woodworking. You don't know unless you expose. Music and math go together, and art and mechanics go together. Visual thinkers just smashing up against all these algebra requirements. A little tiny bit of algebra for dosing drugs, but that can be memorized. Relate math back to something real.
Sometimes student questions don't take the form of a question. They won't start with what, where, how, or why. They'll start with a statement that is really kind of a test of like, this is what I believe to be true. What do you think is almost what they're saying. They'll put out something that they're not sure about and they'll want some clarification on that. And as teachers, we need to really listen for those kind of statements where it's really like a wondering more than a well-articulated question. And we need to kind of be able to recognize that, hear that and say, that's interesting. Tell me more about that. How would we find out if that was true or not? And then really help our students to frame a question from that. So there's a difference between getting good questions when we invite students to write questions and actually being able to listen for and hear genuine acts of inquiry. And they will come very naturally once students are engaged. You almost don't have to teach them to ask questions. Humans are inquisitive beings, just by our very nature. Students will start asking questions when they start wondering. And so it takes some rich opportunities for engagement, some shared learning experiences, and then the questions will start to flow from there.
Try to prepare students for a world that we can't possibly imagine. So, let's try and imagine what that world might look like and then map back to what that might mean in the here and now for education systems. It's almost like we're in this fog. We're at the very beginning of this. We don't know where it's going. We have to take gentle steps.
I think that's the crucial point. I think sometimes that cognitive effort is worth it. And therefore, if you don't have to make that cognitive effort, you won't remember what you've been doing, and it may not be that valuable. But I think often we praise that cognitive effort just because it seems virtuous. And I think the challenge for us is to figure out to what extent these steps we've been taking, these effortful steps, genuinely beneficial in and of themselves, and to what extent they're just things we don't need to do.
This is the start of a long discussion. We don't see it as a scary thing. We see it as a set of excitingly scary questions. We need to move and have the discussion now. We may not solve it immediately, but we need to have the discussion now about what those guardrails are. This moral purpose thing is going to hit us in the face. It's going to really question the boundaries. And this is why I think, as Dylan said, this is a fundamental difference, which is exciting, but we need to get our act together.
What distinguishes a coaching conversation from a more directive conversation is that you interact in a way that is helping the person think more clearly about what they're doing, not so much giving them advice, but really asking questions that helps them get clear on what they're doing. And instructional coaching, what we do in instructional coaching is a person who has a lot of expertise, but they don't act like an expert. They share that expertise in ways where the other person is still the one making the decision, making the choices. So coaching is fueled by listening and questioning. That stands at the heart of it.
I spent a lot of my life complaining about, the system. It's just the system. The system is so messed up. I never stopped to realize, wait a minute, I am the system. If you are in education, you are the system. The people you work with are the system. And when you decide, understand that you have the power to actually change the direction of that system, to use your critical thinking, to use your values, to guide the way that the system ought to be, instead of just always focusing on the way it is, it creates unprecedented levels of power. Do our kids have the psychological safety to be brilliant? Have we created the psychological safety to be brilliant? And when I say this, Cindy, I want to be even one level further. Do our adults have the psychological safety to create psychological safety for children? Because I've been in so many spaces where you've seen this heavy hand since No Child Left Behind passed the United States, where like, hey, it's 10:15 a.m. Why are you not on page 11? Right? There's not a lot of psychological safety when you have to do everything by the book and you can't adapt anything to the kids in front of you because you're afraid of getting in trouble. So psychological safety isn't just some buzzword. It's a prerequisite condition for critical thinking.
We can never lose sight of what it's like to be teaching every day in the classroom. And so for me, and regardless of my role, when I was a principal, when I was at the district level and now working nationally, remembering what it's like to walk into a classroom every day, turn those lights on, and remember the incredible challenges that educators face. And it's been such a crazy few years with all the fallout of COVID and all the chaos that's happened and all the different ways for that, to help us not lose sight of why we do what we do, the purpose of this work, and to just really be driven forward on the opportunity that exists to leave an impact every single day when I walk into that classroom. Or of course, if that scales and I've become that principal or whatever that leadership might be, to not lose sight of the impact that you get to have. And I think that's just so important as we kick off this conversation.
You're the best student of your students, of anybody. Be kind to yourself and take your own next step tomorrow. Keep thinking, keep reflecting, keep asking the kids to join you and making it better. And go one step at a time, just like you do with parenting. It's all you can do.
I hope that your hearts and your minds are as full as mine is right now. I just feel so appreciative for all the guests that we've had on the show. They're just incredible insights and their vulnerability and the strategies that we've been able to take and learn. I just feel like my brain has exploded this year with all this new information. And most importantly, thank you so much to you, our listeners. It's been so fun to connect with you and to create content around the things and the questions that you have. So thanks for joining in, and we're so excited to see you and answer more questions and grow our practice in the new year.